We're here today on Country Pocket with Jett Holden. I think he had one of the best albums last year.
Oh, thank you.
The first song you heard was called Taxidermy. And as far as protest songs go, this is a really bold and heartfelt one. You're confronting an audience from the perspective of a man who died in some controversy. Um, who knows what, but knowing this country, there are a few options. Tell me about getting into that headspace and singing from that perspective.
Yeah, that song came out of the pandemic and like what happened with the Maud Arbery. And I started writing the first verse and chorus based on that. And it was twofold because it was both about like what was happening as far as police brutality, but it was also about the performative activism that coincided with that. And so it was like there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of faces on Facebook walls and Instagram posts, but there wasn't a lot of action behind those words. And so it felt empty. And then I used that same imagery to go and talk about LGBTQ issues and like the Trevor Project and teen suicide. And the rates are astronomical in the queer community. And I just wanted to use it as an opportunity to kind of be very vivid because like the idea of somebody being taxidermy for a Facebook wall is it's kind of heavy handed, but it felt appropriate. And yeah, I just didn't want to shy away from it. It felt like a really cool opportunity to say something, but also leave people with a hopeful message at the end of how we can move forward.
Yeah, you change who you're addressing in that song. You go from addressing the public at large to specifically turning your attention. And I think this is particularly powerful. You're turning your attention to the people hearing that song and who know it might be referring to something that could happen to them.
Yeah.
And just the fact that you know that there are going to be some listeners who hear this song and the first part will apply to them, and there are going to be some listeners who hear this song and they're going to hear that second part, but already know that this song could refer to them in the future. That's powerful and heartbreaking.
Yeah, it felt like it could have been me at any moment. I was living in Northeast Tennessee at the time, which isn't always the best to like queer people or people of color. There was like one gay bar I could go to, and like I would hear the N word out the window just trying to walk to the grocery store. And so like it wasn't the best environment to be around, especially while all that was going on in the world. And yeah, that song came out of a lot of frustration.
You talk about heavy-handedness. Unfortunately, I think we're living in times where the heavy-handedness isn't exactly misguided. Um, but you you really do on so many of these songs. You don't just go to heavy topics. Your performance is really digging into those emotions. Like you sell the song, you just don't write it.
Thank
And
you.
I just, how do you get up and go on stage and do that all the time?
Practice and also a lot of these songs are lived experiences. Like some of them are just me t telling stories, but like with Taxidermy, it was a very personal song. West Virginia Sky, it even though it was a made up story, it told a lot of like where I came from and the places I loved going. And like a lot of the songs I have deep tethers too. So it's not difficult to pull from that in that sense. And it's more so about getting comfortable on stage. That was the difficult part.
Well, I also appreciate the way on taxidermy, you don't just call out performative activism, but the whole idea of social media just being this not so genuine place, this place where people try to make themselves look better than they are. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, how are you feeling about that call these days?
I mean, this election speaks a lot to that. Um, but it people will say a lot and what they stand for, but then they'll go behind a voting booth and do the exact opposite and vote against everything that they said that they supported. And so right now we're seeing the effects of that, and we got 4 years to see what that does. But right now it's a matter of rebuilding and trying to find, I guess, a new place, a new platform to speak from, because I know it's disheartening right now to see what's going on in the world.
Yeah, you talk on your album about souls that are too bright to extinguish, but you almost stepped away from music.
Yeah,
Um, what was coming back like?
terrifying. I didn't want to, but at the same time, I knew I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I didn't take the chance, at least see what was on the other side of that door. And I'm grateful that I did. I gained a lot of community over the last 4 years since Black Opry was incepted, and it's I'm grateful for that. But it was also not just about like giving up on dreams. It was like giving up on yourself in general. Like especially like with that second verse being about like teenage suicide. Like I've dealt with suicidal ideation for a long time, and it was just about not giving up on yourself in that way. Like your life is precious. Um, the best thing you could do is fight for yourself and to fight for other people who may be following in your shoes. And so like that's what I was taking upon myself. I can't force someone else to fight for those things, but it felt important to me to speak on that.
Yeah. Um, let me talk about Perfect Storm. Is that at all a lived experience?
Yes, that was about needing to escape an abusive relationship before it ended violently.
Yeah, that is you are coming from a very dark place on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that one we did a lot of changes to it in the studio because when I originally wrote it, it was very upbeat and they said they were losing the words in it. And so like Will Hogue sat down at the piano and we just started playing through it and slowing it down. And then that just slowly became what the song was this like almost piano ballad, but just like, I don't know, a lamenting song about needing to escape this thing that you once cherished, but is now not serving you. And had been in a controlling relationship specifically, and I feared for myself a lot. And it was difficult. It was the first time I saw what it was that kept people in abusive relationships. And I was the person who couldn't escape it. And so, like, that song was me trying to pull myself out of that mindset.
Yeah. I mean, that's a difficult thing to confess to such a public audience that you were thinking, okay, you know what, this may end violently. I appreciate the honesty. A lot of people go through that type of thing, and I'm sure I'm sure as hard as those words are to hear, it's comforting to have someone, you know, explain how they made their way away.
But yeah, writing's the way I've gotten through so much of my life. Like, That's the therapeutic part of it for me. Like putting it on paper, that's not difficult. Sharing it almost isn't difficult. It's the holding it in that hurts. And so, like, this is my release. None of this process is difficult. Like, sharing it helps me feel like I'm helping someone else. And that in itself is healing for me.
Let's hear Perfect Storm, and we'll be right back. We're back on Country Pocket on WUSB. Today we have Jett Holden with us. Um, I don't want to I don't want to present this album as strictly heavy because there are some very fun moments in it. Um, you you have some fun with Wizard of Oz tropes. You have a song where you team up with Cassidy Pope. Uh,
Yeah, karma.
by the way, just for those of you who don't know, as far as people on mainstream country radio go, Cassidy is probably one of the best people, the best allies. And great to hear the two of you having fun on a song like that. Um, of course, uh, we just heard one that is again heavy, but somehow a little hopeful as well, where the title of the album came from West Virginia Sky. Um, okay, singing as the sun. That is creative way. That is a really creative way of telling this particular story. How did you come up with that angle?
Um, Honestly, I don't know. Sometimes an image just comes to me and I just play with that for a while. The song started with the Phoenix, and I kind of like painted her story first. This is why it's very vivid. Like I think of songwriting as painting a picture. And so like I figured out what the imagery of her story was. And then I added in the other characters. And so there are characters that aren't in this song. But I wrote them out so that I could fill out their story. And then I plugged the pieces in to craft the relationship of this woman who's grown ill and her husband who's watching over her as she deteriorates. And it, for me, spoke to like, I used to help my mom take care of my grandma. She has Alzheimer's. And I've watched that process. And people deal with that all the time, being caregivers for their family, especially as they get older. And it just felt like a really cool way to tell the story by using the imagery around you. And so, like, the phoenix is represented by the changing colors in autumn. And as the leaves fall from the tree, that's her hair falling from her head because of the chemo. And then the rising and setting sun represents her husband. And it also represents the passage of time. So as he rises and sets, you see her slowly deteriorate. And so, like, it just got to have that, in a way, fun push and pull while you're telling this kind of really sad story.
Yeah, I've had people in my life who have been in the position of the sun. I've had people in my life who have been in the position of the Phoenix, and it's a familiar story, but just told in a way that I never would have quite imagined because you don't just, you know, tell the perspective of the husband when you're singing about the son. It takes on this double meaning of mortal life versus time. The sun is just going to keep coming back up, but the things it watches over inevitably fade away. Even mention the sun. Okay, one day it's gonna, you know, one day the sun is going to expand and die, but uh just the notion that that seems, for the sun, literally billions of years, but for a person, just it seems so far out that they would be leaving as well. But they're watching everything else play on this accelerated scale compared to them.
Yeah, a lot of times people say that life is short, but I feel like life feels so long sometimes, and especially like when you're dealing with trauma or loss or something. And in the case of the son in this story, the children that are becoming more distant, um, is like they're only there because like gravity keeps them there, but like it's obligation. It's not out of desire almost. Like he feels like he's losing his touch with every aspect of his life in a lot of ways. And soon he'll reach supernova and his time will come, but what will be left of everything after he's gone? And so like he has that fear.
Yeah, that's another hard place to sing from. But somehow, this and another song, When I'm Gone, they tackle death, but they also give a sense that, okay, there is something else out there, even if you're hesitant to explain it in a specific way. Uh, you know, the optimism comes through on the two tracks that deal with the most, final, the most final exit of the stage. Somehow I feel uplifted from it.
I'm glad that's like what how people feel afterwards. For me, it was like writing the heaviest parts of my life so that I could heal from it. And so if it does that for other people, that's all I ever wanted. But when I'm gone specifically, I wrote after I lost a friend who took her life. And it was written from her perspective because she never wrote a letter. So there weren't really any answers. So the song is supposed to be like her letter talking about when she's gone from this world.
Yeah. Uh, Again, somehow you've taken a lot of darkness and turned it into something, if not digestible, then even beautiful. And no, I really appreciated your work on this one, man.
Thank you. The writing is my favorite part of it. So like when people attach to the lyrics in that way, that means the world to me. So thank you.
I wanted to close this out the way I always do. I ask the artist to pick a song. The only rule is they cannot have had anything to do with creating the original. Um, and gonna give a little prompt. Was wondering if you could share me one of those songs that helped you process through something the way a lot of these songs might help other people.
Oh yeah. Um, I say Time in a Bottle by Jim Croce. It's a song about like if you could encapsulate time in a bottle, what would you spend that time on? And a lot of my music talks about the passage of time and uh like losing people and like what you would spend your time on if you only had this finite amount of time left with them. Jim Croce is one of my favorite songwriters, and the imagery that he used in that song very much colored the way that I write today. But yeah, that song in particular, or Fast Car by Tracy Chapman, it literally came out the year I was born. And like as I've grown, I've gotten to learn what each of those things meant because being a 5-year old listening to that song in the car, is very different than being a 20 something and finally knowing what that heartbreak is. And so like I got to grow up to that one.
Uh, yeah, I don't think you could ask for a much better song to grow up to. All right, Jett Holden, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.